Yeah, thanks very much, Remy. Thanks for having me. Helen, that was wonderful. And it's just great sort of seeing people kind of go through their career and just see how, like, just how much you've blossomed. It's amazing. So, yeah, I came to FFConf for the first time in 2018. And I was just sort of blown away by the sort of sense of like community and friendliness and like diversity, actually, which more diversity than I've seen in any other conference, which I know is always a problem in this industry, but still is. And actually I went to another conference a few months later, Meaning Conference, where I bumped into Julie. So I recognized her from having come up on stage at the end, which she always does. And I went over and said hello, and I was just like, thank you for running that conference. It was really, really great. And then we got chatting, and it turns out that we both, quite stupidly, signed up for Brighton Marathon, having never done a marathon before. And then we started running together, and I don't know, we've just stayed friends ever since. It's been really great. And then a little while later, I actually started a meetup in Brighton where I wanted to get a whole bunch of different people together in one room from different industries and try and get them to talk. And I asked Remy if he would come and talk about FFConf. And he very kindly said yes. I didn't really know what he would talk about, but he wasn't feeling very well on the day. But he came anyway. He smashed out an amazing talk. And I think that's when I really started to understand how much effort goes into this community and how much he fosters it. I just want to say thank you very much. So I'll tell you a bit about me. So I'm a software developer. I'm mostly doing web development. I like to tinker with things, bits of hardware and things like that. I use open source and I like open source. I've contributed a few things. I have a few libraries that I've made, nothing too crazy. I occasionally experiment with LLMs, mostly in my work. I love hackathons, so I just love anything where people are kind of thinking a little bit differently and getting a bit creative. And I'm really interested in communities, and I guess that's, speaking to what I just said before, that's why I started that meetup I started, and that's why I'm here. But for work, I work with these guys. This is Tom and Guy. We came on a little trip to, Tom came down to Brighton, and we had a little trip by the sea, which is very nice. We work on COGS, that's the COGS logo. COGS is basically a control system for immersive theatre and escape rooms, and it's all based on web tech. It's really fun to work on, but I'm not going to talk about that at all. I'm going to talk about technology. So I've used a lot of Apple and Google products for years, and you know what? A lot of them just work really, really well. They're super reliable. And as a developer, I kind of started my developer journey really as an Android developer. And I kind of really enjoyed that Android ecosystem, and I got to use more and more of the Google products. And I just liked how well integrated they were, how reliable they were, and they just seemed to keep getting better. And I was kind of like a bit of a Google fanboy for a while. I think I was just like, I will use all of their stuff, and whenever there's new products come out, this is great. Does anyone remember Inbox? Inbox was like my favorite thing. It was like, they basically took email and just simplified it and added a few little features just to make it work really, really well, and just took out a little of the cruft. And I was like, this is great. It's so clean, it's reliable, it's user-friendly, and I was like, this is the best thing to ever happen. Especially because I relied on my email quite a lot. But Google shut it down. They sunset it. And then I started seeing this pattern of Google kind of coming out with these products that seemed really great. And they seemed to be growing and gaining momentum, and then they would shut them down. And you just sort of hear this little uproar from everyone going like, what have you done? Like, why are you doing this? And it really made me think, like, why are we doing this, and should we be using Google products? So I'm going to focus on like Google stuff. Like, this applies to a lot of different companies, I'll be honest, but I'm going to focus on some Google stuff for a bit. So I sort of said, I'm not going to use any Google things for a while. Let me try and slowly, bit by bit, just move away from using Google stuff. I mean, some of the things that really weirded me out were like looking at my search history, and Google have this thing called Google Takeout, where you can download every bit of data that they have about you, so you can just kind of download it as a zip file and explore it. So that's your entire search history, your location history from Google Maps, every photo you've ever uploaded, every email you've exchanged with everyone. And I was just looking through it, it just felt a bit creepy. It's like too much stuff for, all in one place that knows about me and just knows too much. And it just didn't really feel right to me. So I was like, okay, let's see if I can kind of, try using some other stuff. And this also feels a little bit weird, right? So Google, its revenue in the last 3 months, in the last quarter, it has just passed a record-breaking $100 billion. That's in the last 3 months. And it didn't cost me a thing to use most of their products. And that's generally their business model to the end user. And it just made me think, like, where is all their money coming from? And how do I fit into this? This is really quite strange. Who's winning? Shareholders, basically. So let's kind of scale back a bit. Like, where did Google come from? So Google actually started as a thing called Backrub. So Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they started this thing called Backrub back at Stanford. And they found a way they came up with an algorithm for modeling the web as a connected graph of links. And they outgrew Stanford, and in 1998, they started Google. So at Google, they came up with an algorithm called PageRank. And PageRank, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but like PageRank is basically the algorithm that decides how far up search results you go, given some search keywords. And the more popular your site is, the more likely you are to go to the top. So as your PageRank improves, you get more traffic. And as you get more traffic, you can find ways to monetize that traffic. And it's usually ads. So in 2014, Google IPO'd a valuation of $23 billion. And people just kept using it. It kind of just, took over. And as people added more and more ads to their sites to try and monetize them and try and push, and try and make money by, pushing their way up the search rankings and then placing some ads, the sites just got slower. So in 2015, Google came up with this thing called AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages. And it was pretty controversial at the time. Firstly, their slogan was "Make the web great again." That was before the Trump campaign, so actually they got there first. Maybe Trump got his inspiration from them, who knows. It was basically a spec for sites that were more accessible and more indexable to Google. And it kind of maintained their monopoly. And actually, by default, the pages were hosted on google.com, so actually you weren't even getting the traffic, and it meant people couldn't monetize stuff as much as they were. Some sites were actually even slower. And the websites, at that point, if you're a content provider, you were feeling quite powerless, and Google really was in control. If you have an iPhone, generally, and actually probably pretty much every Android phone, I think, as well, if you go and search for something in the browser, by default, that search will happen on Google. Google pays Apple more than $20 billion a year just to be that default search engine. So to Google, it must be worth more than $20 billion, right? So it's obviously very valuable. They actually also pay Mozilla to be the default search engine on Firefox. That's around about $400 million a year, so it's much, much, much less. But that is 85% of Mozilla's income. So Mozilla actually wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that. So like in many ways, I guess great, because we have this kind of competing browser. But yeah, it's still bringing in like a massive income for Google at the same time. This year, a US judge ruled that Google do not have a monopoly on search, because in your browser and in iOS and in Android, you can change your default search engine. So they're saying that's not a monopoly. Now, I kind of disagree. It's the default option, and a lot of people aren't going to change that, and I think that's a monopoly, right? That is, a lot of people won't even think about changing that. So Google have a lot of other products, but most of their revenue comes from search. So about 57% of their revenue comes from search. So this is obviously a very big business. So let's look at it from the other side. So let's say I want to sell something. I have a razor to sell, right? So I basically want to place some ads somewhere, and somehow people are going to start buying those razors, and then I'm going to make a load of money. So the naive approach basically is to just put some ads on lots of websites. So find people with websites and go, I want to put an ad on it. But if you're just putting ads willy-nilly to everyone and you're being charged for each one of those ads, you're not going to make a huge amount of money because you don't know who's going to see them. So you want to try and target that down, right? So, for example, if someone comes to your website from a search engine and they've used in their search term the word buy, because they want to buy something, then you're much more likely it's much more likely that they're going to buy something. So you want to put an ad in front of them. They might be a repeat visitor, they might have been to visit a competitor, they might be in a location that you're selling, and so actually that's where you want to, you can have these signals to put ads in front of people so you know it's worth spending more money on those people. So the way this works is you basically place a bid based on your keywords and your target audience on your ad platform of choice. In this case, I'm looking at Google, and the more specific you get, the more expensive it is to place that ad. And the more other people who are placing ads on similar topics, then the more expensive it gets. So basically, you're just in a sort of bidding war with other people. And you can see how that kind of cycle just ends up being quite big business. So this is what it looks like if you then search for, I want to buy a razor. I did this search yesterday. And you get basically 2 pages of like sponsored links and stuff before you even get to a search result. So they're all links that Google is going to make money out of. Cool. So then imagine you have a website and you want to make some money. You're like, I have advertising space. This is great. Like I've got traffic. I want to put some ads on here. Well, AdSense is Google's product for that. Basically, if you put a bit of code on your website, and instead of you having to go and find people to advertise on your site, Google will do it for you. That's basically what it does. But it just means you end up with more and more and more ads. So I don't know, like I'm sure who's been on a website and just found that there's just like ads coming out of them left, right, and center. Raise your hands. Yeah, that's basically everyone, right? Like, and in my head, it kind of starts to feel a bit like this, like it did in the old days, or we had like loads of toolbars and stuff, and it's just like, it's really, really irritating. It's really bad for users, I think. There's also Google Analytics. So now, if you have a website and you want to try and understand who is coming and who else you could be targeting and what kind of ads you could be targeting, Google Analytics is basically like the best-in-class kind of analytics engine. It gives you so much information about the people that are visiting your site, but it's giving you kind of aggregated data about that. Google itself knows a lot more specific information, and then across different sites, it's basically sharing all that information between them. So the way this works, I'm sure a lot of you know this, is you place a little script tag in your website, and that will call Google, and it will drop a cookie on your website as well. And then if someone else also has Google Analytics, the same cookie will basically get sent to that site, to Google Analytics, so that you can basically be tracked across sites. I hope that makes sense. So let's talk about some other products. So Google has a whole bunch of products, right, that are all basically free, and every time you use them, you're giving them more information about yourself, and therefore, you're giving them kind of information that can be linked across those trackers with all the cookies and things as well. So like Gmail is a great example. Every time you're accessing Gmail, you're kind of placing some cookies that can be tracked across Google Analytics and all those kind of things as well. But you're also giving them loads of information about all of your purchases and all of your appointments and all of your contacts. Google Maps, you're kind of encouraged to share your location in that. I think this one's quite interesting, actually. So you used to have this thing called, in Google Maps there's a thing called your timeline, and that gives you a full location history. And when you did a Google takeout, you would see like everywhere you've been down to like the nearest 5 meters for the last however many years you've had that phone, right? It's terrifying. They've actually scaled that back a bit because governments would come to them and say, I want to know where this person has been, and basically legally in their jurisdiction, they would have to hand that information over. Google have basically decided that's too much hassle, so they're just not doing that anymore. So that information actually now stays on your device in Google Maps. Android is a whole world. It's like the operating system that runs on most of the phones in the world. There's a whole world of stuff there, but I think the most interesting thing about Android is that it's open source, but not really open source. So the operating system itself is open source, but the version that a lot of you will have in your pockets has like a thing called Google Play Services, which is basically calling home to Google all the time, and has a whole bunch of Google Apps, including the Google Play Store, and it's only in China, really, is the only place that you can get a phone that doesn't have that. It's very much a monopoly as far as I'm concerned. And I've started to notice this sort of sign in with Google thing popping up everywhere as well, and that's a similar thing. They're trying to kind of get more information about more people across more of the web. Here's the thing I discovered last week. I was like, I'm putting some slides together, I'm going to listen to some music. It didn't work, because I was using Linux, and I opened a browser, and I opened my streaming service, and it could not play the audio, and I was like, what's going on? And it turns out I had to install this thing. So I didn't know about this. Widevine is a DRM system, so it's basically, if you're playing media on the web, and you're playing copyrighted media on the web, you're playing encrypted media a lot of the time. And so there are various DRM services, and there's a DRM spec, like a web spec for how to access encrypted content. And it was quite controversial when it was introduced, partly because the way it works is, yes, there's a spec, but actually the implementation of it is up to various individuals, right? So, so Widevine is used by Spotify, it's used by Netflix, it's used by HBO, it's used by Udemy, it's used by BBC iPlayer, it's used by like so many things. It is by far and away the sort of biggest DRM provider. And every time you play something, it's calling back to Google to say, am I allowed to play this thing? Can I please decrypt it? It's quite opaque. The source code is not available. And it's actually quite hard to know like how much information it's giving about you. But that's like a whole rabbit hole that I would love to go down. There's a lot of rabbit holes in this talk, and I've tried to skim over some of them, but we'll see. Google Chrome, similar to Android, Chromium is actually the open source project. Chrome is the version that most people use. Now, there are builds of Chrome available. They have auto updates and things, and the builds of Chromium are a bit harder to get. They're sort of hidden in a folder somewhere, and they're sort of done on a best effort basis. The Chrome version, the way this differs is Chrome includes signing into your Google account. It has all the features for doing that, which they can then auto sign you into various different websites. It includes the Widevine DRM. It includes like Google's text-to-speech. It includes some of the new kind of LLM APIs. And more, the web specs and the browsers are sort of saying, here's what we should provide, but the actual source code of what they're providing is becoming more closed. And I just don't, I don't really think that's in the spirit of open source, personally. Chrome has a 73% market share at the moment of all browsers. That is like so much more than all the other browsers combined. And considering, especially that you have to, like on pretty much every machine, you have to go and download it. That's like a conscious decision you're making. It's kind of really showing you like how much power, and how much influence Chrome has. And it just, if you've got one platform that is influencing web standards, then they're just going to have, I think, too much control over those standards. It's not going to be so much of a discussion. It's going to be a little bit more kind of authoritarian, I think. Okay, let's talk about, I've been sort of bashing Google for a bit, so I'll talk about Meta. I'll bash them for a while. I've got a lot of time to do that. So the Meta Pixel works in a really, really similar way to Google Analytics. So you drop it on your website, and it tells you a lot about the people that are coming to your website, and it allows you to kind of target your ads more. At the moment, Meta is earning, in the last quarter, I think Meta has earned 2/3 of the ad revenue of Google. So it's almost as big as Google these days, but its growth rate is 2 times year on year of Google. So it is going to grow, and it's going to be bigger and earning more money than Google in no time at all. The data with the Facebook Pixel is shared across Facebook, Instagram, Threads, WhatsApp as well. And the thing with Meta is that they've kind of shown that they'll happily go quite far to get a bit of data about you, right? So last year, it was discovered that there was this thing built into the Android, Facebook, and Instagram apps. So it was a little server that ran on your phone. So it opened a little port up on localhost. It was a WebRTC server. WebRTC's standard use for streaming media across the internet. And basically, they took advantage of an exploit where they could essentially send a request to that server. So it was found that in the Meta pixel tracker, it would send a request to the server running on your device, as well as the Meta servers, and it would send the same requests, so it could basically kind of match the two up, if you see what I mean. Now, the interesting thing about that is because that's running on your local device, if you open an incognito window, it's still managing to basically track you across your non-incognito windows and everywhere else you've been on the internet that has a metapixel. Just like a massive privacy violation. So that's kind of on the legal proceedings of that are sort of ongoing, and the estimate is like between the EU, the UK, and the US that they could face, I think it's up to 23 billion in fines. I think that's right. Interestingly, Yandex. So if you don't know what Yandex is like the biggest search engine in Russia. It's like their equivalent of Google. They've been doing this since 2017. They don't do it anymore, apparently. But it was found that on the top 100,000 websites on the internet, 78% of sites had a metapixel that would call back to that localhost tracker. And on those same sites, 84% had the Yandex tracker that would call back to the Yandex localhost thing. They've both now stopped, thankfully, but I don't know. It's quite interesting that they'll happily do these things which seem, I think, unethical, but they somehow get to the point where they're doing them at scale in a big company. Oh, my clicker's still working. One sec. Okay. So what does this mean to users? Well, this is the sort of thing you might see if you use an app or you use a website that's using cookies. It's asking for your consent. In a lot of countries, it's worth remembering that they don't have laws that say they have to ask for consent. So like in the US, this doesn't happen, right? They're just tracking you across all these things without even asking. So yeah, how bad does it get? Well, they know, these sort of advertising algorithms and tracking algorithms, they know that if you're likely to be pregnant, they're likely to know if you're a target for subprime loans, if you're depressed or anxious, and they can kind of advertise various drugs and things to you. And those kind of algorithms, they can really send you down an algorithmic rabbit hole, and it can make things worse. I'm sure you've heard and read about these sorts of things before, but I kind of just wanted to remind you that this is a thing. And it really weirded me out. So trackers across the internet, right? So we think across the entire internet, 7.8% of every web request is a request to load a tracker. And a lot of those trackers will actually load trackers from other domains. And if you take those into account, this estimate from AdGuard is like almost 20%. That's like almost a fifth of all of the web requests are just for tracking information. That's just so much traffic. That's a lot of bandwidth. That's a lot of CPU. It's a lot of energy. And I think all of it just makes for a worse experience for users generally. And how prolific is it? Well, Google trackers are on, what was that? 99% of the top 10,000 websites on the internet. And according to this study, from all the web traffic they found, the estimate is about 71%. 71% of all web traffic has a Google tracker on. Amazon, also huge. I don't actually know who Kaspersky Lab is, but they're apparently massive. If anyone knows, please tell me afterwards. Meta, also huge. But okay, so what if you don't use Google products, Amazon products, and Meta products? And I hear this from people all the time. I'll sort of say to people you know what, I'm not using any of the Meta stuff anymore. I don't really, or I'll try to use it a lot less or whatever. And I hear from people this kind of apologetic reply. They're just like, oh no, but I only use it for such and such a thing, right? They're like, oh, I don't use Facebook. Well, actually, I do check it occasionally, but I just have an account, or I don't stay signed in, but I just have it for these one or two things. But that's not the point. The point is that you are using it because all the sites that you're using have a tracker on them that is basically sending information back to Meta, and that's how they're making money from you. They're using that information to then place ads on various other things. Let's talk about X. There's so much to talk about with X. I don't even know where to start. I stopped using Twitter a long time ago. It was just too much, right? But now it's just so much worse. So in 2022, Elon Musk took it over. He fired a lot of the staff, and he removed a lot of the content moderation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, content moderation was like the biggest feature of X, and that was like, or of Twitter, but not of X. So he also promised to open source the algorithm, so we could kind of see a lot more about, how does it work under the hood. So here's some of the source code. You can see that it's boosting. It basically has control over content that is from Elon Musk, content that is that is deemed as democratic or deemed as Republican. It has a lot of influence. And so this was from the first version that was published up on GitHub. Interestingly, if you load this commit now on GitHub, hang on, did that show? Oh, sorry, I've added a really, really long animation here, which I accidentally forgot to take out. Anyway, if you load this commit on GitHub, it doesn't really exist in the Git history anymore. It just says, they've rewritten the history. So you can still load it, and the page is still there because it's still in the kind of like the Git ether. Yeah, they kind of tried to hide it, and they haven't updated that for since 2023. I just think it's kind of fascinating. So more and more of the internet is starting to kind of realize that, shock marketing, shocking content is the stuff that's really going to gain engagement and therefore make them the most money. And yeah, the more extreme it gets, the less I want to use it. And I just think the internet starts to feel a bit more like this, and I really, really don't like it. It's quite cheerful, this, isn't it? Has anyone watched The Great Hack? Hands? Yes? No? Not that many. Wow, interesting. Highly recommend this film. It's basically about, this is a film about exposing the work of Cambridge Analytica and their involvement in the ad campaigns during the UK Brexit referendum and also the 2016 US elections. So it's kind of exposing how really Cambridge Analytica was allowing pro-Brexit campaigners and pro-Trump campaigners to basically place ads in to people in swing states and swing voters that could massively influence the election. And the theory, and very much the theory that is proposed, is this is what allowed them to win those elections. So the original article was in The Guardian. So an amazing journalist called Carol Codwaller, she wrote this article, and this was about a year before the film came out. She was sued, she was sent death threats. Tech companies not much happened to them. They basically carry on as normal. And this is kind of how our democracy works now. It's kind of fun, isn't it? The founder of Cambridge Analytica, just before he shut it down, basically scarpered with about $8 million, we think. And then at the same time, set up this company called Emma Data, which is basically the same as far as anyone can tell. And people started pointing the finger and saying, hang on a minute, aren't you just doing the same thing under a different name? And this was all before the article and the film came out. And we think that basically they're doing the same thing, and they're continuing to do the same thing, but they're just it's quite obscure, and it's actually really hard to track. There's a huge rabbit hole here that I would love to go down, but I don't really know. But the thing that scares me about this is that this is kind of how our politics works now, right? So because there's so much information about us, politics can now micro-target exactly who they want to target, and then influence their opinion by just showing them various kind of scary things that will, push them in a certain direction, nudge their thinking and their beliefs in a certain direction. So if you've watched the film, which is not many of you, it turns out, what do you do differently now? I think is a really interesting question. With this information, what could you do differently now? But the question I really want to ask is, what does politics do differently now? Politics basically does the same thing, I think. And I think this is now just endemic in how politics works. And it's just more underhanded, now that we've had a few exposés of these sorts of things, but actually we're not seeing much of this happen. But they've very much set the playbook for how this works. So I hope you're feeling inspired. Yeah, haven't even mentioned AI yet. Bloody hell. There's a lot. It's all changing very, very, very fast. It's kind of, there's AI in practically everything you go and use, whether it's your search engine or your coding environment or, your communication platforms and whatever. It's absolutely everywhere. And the really interesting thing about AI and search is that people aren't visiting websites anymore, right? So with your search engines, it's giving you a link, you'll follow that website's getting a load of traffic. The web is changing in that, like, if people are using LLMs to get those answers, those sites are not getting that traffic anymore. So they have to figure out other ways to monetize. There's some people doing some interesting kind of thought leadership around this, I think, and I think some of it's promising and some of it's controversial. I think Cloudflare are doing some interesting stuff with like trying to sort of gatekeep LLMs accessing data in the first place. But there's just lots of stuff happening on both sides. But yeah, but why is this happening? This is my question, right? So, and I think it's a bit of a fear of being left behind. It's users think, well, if I don't learn how to use these things, or I don't kind of like accelerate my work rate through this, I'll lose my job. It's companies saying, if we don't roll these features out, then people are going to go to competitors. And it's investors saying, well, everyone's investing in this right now, so like maybe I should be investing in the same thing. So if you look at investments in AI, like especially in the US, like the sheer amount of money that's being invested into AI companies that don't really have a business plan. Like OpenAI, I think they've said that they're planning to be profitable, hopefully by 2030, if they're lucky. And like the amount of money that they're gaining at the moment is kind of crazy just from investment. So basically, who's hoping to profit out of this? Well, it's the shareholders, probably. We'll see. I mean, there's a crazy amount of money piling into this stuff, right? And there's this sort of like, there's this like underlying race for AGI. So AGI is artificial general intelligence. So that's basically a system that is basically as smart as a human is, or potentially smarter. And there's this race to sort of build that and control that system. It's almost like a race for like controlling God. So these are all the systems that are going to be used to create all new systems in the future that will control their actions, that will control our opinions potentially, and it just, yeah, isn't that God? Like anyway, but yeah, I think, and to Helen's point from earlier, and I think it's really important to think about who's doing this, right? Most of these people who are running these companies are white men with bias, some of them with a lot more bias than others. And LLMs have things like system prompts at the moment. That's the way they work, right? A system prompt is like the instructions of how to behave. A tiny little change in that could have a huge impact in even little impacts across lots of products could have a huge impact in total, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and Trump's been getting really cozy with these guys, like really cozy. We saw this sort of during his inauguration, and there's something a little bit insidious going on here. So basically, keep in mind that Trump himself has his own kind of mouthpiece, which is his Truth Social platform. So these are all people that can control a lot of media and a lot of ads, and they can make Trump wealthier, they can make themselves wealthier. Trump can allow them to essentially take some of that, to sort of take some of those checks and balances away for them to become wealthier, and he gets a bigger mouthpiece, right? And it's this kind of weird feedback loop. And it's a feedback loop where like the most powerful people have found a way to make themselves even more powerful that we just can't do anything about, it feels like. So there's a really interesting Panorama documentary from last week on the BBC about Peter Thiel and his involvement in that, and crypto, and like how much Trump's benefiting from that. Really fascinating, worth a watch. And basically, it's turning into this kind of like authoritarian regime, right? And I feel like, if you've been reading the news at all, this is what it feels like. Like Trump is kind of just has so much control over media and companies and the way people think, and it's just getting pretty scary. But the question I want to ask is, are we complicit? Are we complicit by using the platforms that these billionaires are giving us, that therefore give them the data and therefore the power that allow people like Cambridge Analytica, et cetera, to place those ads, to swing the votes, and to completely, change the political landscape? So have a think, right? What services are you using? What do those things stand for? But yeah, it's all been a bit doom and gloom. So I want to talk a little bit about who's helping. So firstly, the Federal Trade Commission in the US, they sued Amazon for artificial price inflation to the tune of about $1 billion. Ofcom in the UK, they do things like the right to portability. If you have a mobile phone subscription with a provider, you can kind of change to a different provider, and that switch has to happen within 2 hours, and Ofcom put that in place. The first version of that came from the EU, but the Ofcom kind of like tightened it up, and they said, we're going to make it stricter, and that's really, really great. The EU are also the people that, told us that we should know when we're being tracked with cookies. GDPR to stop companies sharing data about you, the right to delete your data, so much more. I mean, the EU, just like, as far as I can tell, they're just doing more than any other, like nation kind of state, really, to protect us and to protect us from monopolies, I think, is the big thing. So yeah, so like let's find some other. So there are a whole load of things out on the internet that really give me some hope, right? Patreon is amazing. So Patreon, the idea behind that is if you are a YouTube creator or someone who creates videos, you can monetize those directly. You can create a community and monetize those directly. And a lot of communities have sprung up from that. Bandcamp is basically the same for like bands and music. Discord is like online communities, but monthly subscriptions and things mean that like content creators and communities can find ways to fund themselves. And Substack has a special place in my heart because it's all based on email, and I really like email. My favorite Substack, by the way, is a thing called Fix the News. If you haven't come across it, it's really great. There's a lovely Australian man called Angus who kind of runs that. And it's basically a review of all of the positive things, all the positive news that we've made from around the world, like all the positive impacts that human beings have had in terms of like climate change and just progressive policies and all these kind of things. And it just really feels like an antidote to all the other stuff that's out in the news. This is becoming more of a thing, right? So you go to a website and it goes, cookies. We'll track you, or you can pay us some money. And this kind of like, I think this is good, right? It's like people are now understanding that actually I'm giving away something by being tracked, and actually I have this other option and I can pay you some money instead, and there's another income for these things. Like, I think media is just trying to find a way to survive, but I hope this means that like people are becoming, are understanding what's going on here. I think at the moment the payment is less convenient, and I think there's stuff that we can do there, but yeah, anyway. So what other things can we do as companies, as managers, developers, consumers? And I've said influencers here, right? Each one of you in this room, I'm calling you an influencer. I hate that word, but I'm calling you an influencer in a different way, right? So a lot of you will probably be thought of as the tech person amongst your friends and family. People will come to you and say, like, well, what do you do? What advice do you have here? You have some sway over those people, and that's how these things start. So firstly, permissions pop-ups. These come up all the time. I hope this one's obvious, but like if things ask for permission and you don't want to give it permission, say no. Some apps will say, I need access to all of your contacts before you can use it. Like, please say no to that. And if you're an app developer and you're a designer, please don't design your user interfaces and your apps and your services to require this information. Make it opt-in. Pull is better than push. What I mean by this is, if you are consuming some content, you should choose to consume that content. Turn off autoplay. Autoplay is on by default on Netflix, on YouTube, on loads of other stuff. Just turn it off, and then once that thing's finished, you can then choose what to do. Turn off the suggestions, right? So ad blockers are really good for this. You can turn off suggestions down the side, down the bottom, because those are the things that will hook you into staying on that platform for longer and longer and longer. Use email. I really love email. It's based on an open standard. It's great. So these are two of my favorite email newsletters. One's called TLDR, so Too Long Don't Read, and that's around, and the other one's called Pointer. They're both kind of tech news. I think they're usually daily or weekly. I can't remember which one's which. But they're a really good roundup of like what's going on with a quick summary, and then you can kind of go and read what's interesting. So that's new. They're talking about new libraries and new platforms and new ways of thinking, and I think they're both really, really great. Oh yeah, and while I'm on email, unsubscribe. Oh my God, please just unsubscribe from the emails you don't want. There's just so much stuff coming into people's inboxes that you just don't need. Anyway, news. News is huge, right? So think about where you get your news from. So a lot of people these days are getting their news from social media, but there are loads of news services that are out there. Kagi News is like an aggregator, and it gets news from all over the place. Ground News is a really interesting one. I haven't used this one personally, but it's an aggregator, but it tries to give you an idea of any kind of bias in that article, especially political, and then try and show you a different perspective. And then you've got things like The Nerve and The Citizens, and I think these two you probably haven't heard of. They were actually both started by Carol Cadwalladr, who wrote the original Guardian article that led to the Cambridge Analytica expose, which led to the Greyhack film, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are about data sovereignty, about tech rights, and about our freedom. And there's just loads of really interesting stuff there. I love it. But yeah, I'm going to reiterate, do not rely on social media for your news, because you will be fed this kind of kind of processed food kind of diet, really, of content. And the only people that are benefiting from those is shareholders. So the web, use the web. Actually, the web standards are a really, really good way for us to say, they've been built really well, right? They're protecting our privacy and our user experience. And a lot of apps don't quite so much. They can run in the background, and they can get a lot more information about you. If there's a web version of that thing, use the web version of that thing. I bet you it worked really well. You can use ad blockers as well to kind of I think I mentioned ad blockers already, but to kind of load less content. But browsers like Brave will have ad blockers and things built in. Firefox has a load of trackers and things built in that are turned on by default. Tracker blockers built in that are turned on by default. And then you can dial that up as well. So you can say, actually, I definitely don't want to be tracked by anyone. Orion is a new one that I've been using recently. What's interesting, I think, here about Firefox and Orion is that they're not based on Chromium. Firefox is its own code base with its own kind of source of funding, which is Google. But anyway, yeah, Orion's based on WebKit. It's super fast, and it's designed with privacy in mind. And there's some really new stuff coming out, actually. So there's a load of people working on this thing called the Ladybird project. Ladybird is a bunch of people working on a new browser built from the ground up with privacy, web standards, and performance in mind. They're like, what if we didn't have to support all of this old legacy stuff? And I'd encourage you to go and check it out and get involved. It's called Ladybird. Search. DuckDuckGo is you've probably heard of that one. So that's basically search, but they take your privacy in mind. They're still sticking ads in front of you, but they're not tracking you. So those ads are generally not very targeted. Kagi is a paid-for search engine. So that's a search aggregator. It will actually go out to different search engines and find information and kind of give it to you in a sort of Google-like UI with no ads. And it's a few pounds a month, and it's great. Honestly, it's really, really, really good. And given how much we use search, I think we should really think about this, right? How many times a day do you actually do a Google search or whatever search, right? It's quite a lot. So for me, paying a few pounds a month for this kind of service is great. Mojeek, has anyone heard of Mojeek? Yeah, cool. I wouldn't. Anyway, Mojeek is a company, happens to be based in Brighton, and they're one of the few companies out there that are building their own search index. And I was like, well, how are you making money? I know how Google's making money now, but how are you making money? And I just went and talked to him. It was great. And they're selling their services to other companies. They're basically saying you can rebrand some search, and they have a business model that makes sense to me, essentially. Messaging, I can go on and on about messaging for ages. Signal basically was founded by one of the founders of WhatsApp, and it's private messaging by design, full open source protocol and open source apps and everything. It is a not-for-profit. You pay if you can. And it works very, very similarly to WhatsApp. I moved a whole load of my kind of friends' chats and some family chats over to Signal. And to start with, everyone's a bit like, this is a bit annoying. I have to press a different button. And then very quickly, everyone was like, that's fine. But then we've also got RCS. RCS is fascinating, I think. RCS is I can't remember what it stands for, Relay Chat Service or something like that. Thank you. And that is a standard that now has to be implemented across all phones. So when you open your Messenger app, like, yes, it used to be able to do just SMS, but then it was SMS and MMS, so you could send pictures. But now RCS means that you can send pictures and all the other stuff that you can do in WhatsApp and in Signal, and it's a standard that everyone has to implement. You don't actually need to use WhatsApp and Signal to get all of those features anymore. You get typing indicators, and you get like emoji reactions, and you get all of that stuff, and it's all built in. In theory, it replaces all these apps, but apps like WhatsApp already have a kind of network effect that's holding people in. But you can choose to kind of try a different one, right? Even if it's one or two of your chats, like, it's a good starting point to go, like, we don't have to use this for everything. Email, there's some really great email services. I would highly recommend paying for email. Personally, I rely on email a lot. So I want it to be private, I want it to be secure. I use Fastmail, it works really, really well. Proton Mail is also really similar. You can just suck in all of the information. They just have a kind of one-click, like, migrate over from like Gmail, Hotmail, whatever else you're using, and it makes it really easy. And the reason why this is easy is because they all implement IMAP, and IMAP is an open standard. Please use open standards. They include like calendars, contacts, notes, all that kind of thing. VPNs, if you want to protect your location, and I highly recommend you do, use VPNs. There's millions of them out there. I think if you've watched a YouTube video in the last however long, like any YouTube video, you will have been advertised a VPN. I don't know why there's such big business right now, but I guess it's good, right? I think that's great. Photos, I used to really love Google Photos. I still really love Google Photos. I think as a product, it is really, really interesting. It's just like super clean, but it's just, it allows you to search by person, search by location, do all sorts of like weird and wonderful things, but it's just really easy to use and it just works. And you can stick every photo you've ever taken in it and it just deals with it. But I've switched to this thing. This is called Enter, which is German for duck, I think. And it has basically all the same features. And like, it's actually costing me less, I think, to use Enter. And like, it has all the same features, and all those features happen on device. And all the data is end-to-end encrypted. They can never see it. And it's great. It's really, really good. Maps, OpenStreetMap is amazing. It's basically Wikipedia for maps. It was like pretty much like a one-man band for a really long time. There's this really awkwardly named app called OSM which is OpenStreetMaps for Android, which now you can also find on iOS, still called OSM But basically, you can use that instead of Google Maps. It actually has a lot more data in a lot of places, and just like Wikipedia, if something doesn't look right, you can just fix it, which is great. And then, like, as a developer, you can also there's loads of stuff, right? So if you're using LLMs, you don't have to use a web-based LLM that you're paying a monthly subscription for. You can go to Hugging Face and download an open weight model. You can use Ollama and run that on your machine. And you can run that as many times as you want. You can run it offline. And you can build your own product with those things. And I think that's really, really cool. But show support, right? So show support for the things that matter. Open source, please give to open source. If you're using open source stuff, find a way to give to open source. And if you run a company and you control the budgets for that company, put aside a budget to say, like, you know what, we use a lot of this stuff, we're going to contribute back. Even if it's a little bit, those little bits add up to a lot, and those open source contributors can make a living out of it, and you get a lot back for it. Pay for apps. If you're using an app and it has a freemium option, you're like, you know what, I use this all the time. I'm happy to pay a few quid for all the value I get from this every single day. Please do. Wikipedia is constantly asking for donations. Please give Wikipedia donations. They're like an incredible resource that we have. I don't even want to start about Grokpedia. Oh my God, that's Elon Musk's alternative to Wikipedia, which is just very right-wing. Let's try and ignore that one. Wikipedia is the one that we care about. That is basically designed for us, and a lot of their money goes into content moderation to make sure things are factual and not biased. But most importantly, I want you to discuss these things, right? Take any of these ideas. There's like a million more kind of apps and services that you can try that are out there, but just talk about it, right? Find communities, find online communities like this. Go and talk at lunchtime in the break time about, like, what might you try? What one thing might you try and be like, you know what, I could make that change today, and just see what it's like. Stick with it and see what you think. You do have influence, whether you think you're an influencer or not. You do have influence. People will listen to you. But my rules of thumb are like try to find things that have a clear business model where privacy comes first, because if privacy doesn't come first, then basically the business model is, I think, not that clear. And that are ideally using open standards as much as they can and allow you to switch in and out easily. If you're using a product that can do all of these things and they're still attracting customers, like that's got to be a really good product. I think that's a really good rule of thumb. But yeah, my prompt to you is to just try something new. Try something new, be curious, stick with it for a little while, throw a little bit of money at it, and see, maybe you can contribute, maybe you can give back, maybe you can say, here's a bug report, here's a pull request, here's some suggestions. But anyway, I'm not really online very much on socials, but I am very much here. So if you want to chat to me about any of this stuff or any other stuff, I'm very happy to chat. Thank you very much.